All right, Brian. So we've talked a lot about context and things and being in context and, getting through stuff and doing stuff and keep doing more stuff, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, but here's where I'm going with that is that sometimes you just shouldn't do stuff. You should just take it easy, be bored a little bit, kind of let your mind and your body rest, right?
Yes. It's a lost art, especially now when there's constant distraction or novelty that you can find just a
Anywhere.
tap
Yeah.
away from your
Yeah.
phone.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit, and we've talked about this before, but let's talk about the necessity of boredom, huh?
Part 2 today on Curiosity Continuum.
Hey, everybody, this is Josh.
And this is Brian.
Welcome to the podcast for Curiosity Continuum.
Curiosity Continuum is an industry innovating, non-traditional company passionate about growing wisdom in the next generation.
We are the essential bridge between the analog and digital worlds by building collaborative communities that unleash the power of adaptive expertise and innovation needed to thrive in the 21st century.
We combine and mix essential elements needed to empower people to succeed in new ways not possible outside of a creative, thoughtful, diverse community of fellow curious people.
Follow us on your favorite podcast app to receive notifications of new content. If you like what you hear and you want to dive deeper, visit us at curiositycontinuum.com. Thanks for tuning in, and let's start the conversation.
We have an episode from back in the day called The Necessity of Boredom, and it was something where we actually talked about how our childhood was. It doesn't make it sound terribly intriguing when we say we were bored a lot.
Right.
But everybody has those stretches. I think what happens when you have boredom like displayed now in things like online, it is like a 15-second caricature of like how bored you are. It doesn't actually like capture the emotion that happens across 3 hours of time.
Correct. Yeah. And sometimes I think we're missing as a society that it's okay to just have that moment of rest, right? Where you do have that 3 hours of maybe unstructured time or time that you're just sitting there watching TV, or I mean, many people don't watch TV anymore like that, but or browsing YouTube or just doing something non quote unquote productive, right, Brian?
Yeah, you'll probably find your way into something innovative or
Right.
something that is actually beneficial to you. It makes it sound like you're signing up to do like something training 101. But my son actually, we've kind of had like a slow month with media, which has been good. And he's been drawing a lot more. And in fact, some of his classmates have seen his drawings like, hey, could you draw that on my shoes? And he's been
Sure.
kind of exploring his drawing style. It's called pen and paper.
Right.
It has nothing to do with anything that doesn't require it of you. But he came to me because that outlet for that, like his normal entertainment, was gone. And he's like, I'm bored. I'm like, okay. And I just let it sit there just like that. And he's like, so what do I do? I said, you'll figure something
You missed
out.
the ultimate dad joke. You said, well, I'm dad. How are you, bored?
Yeah. Some days I probably would do that.
Yeah.
Today I can't do that. He found something to do because it required his brain to engage.
Right.
Here's the thing. Like when your brain's not engaged, you actually don't. I'm sorry. When you actually disengage your brain, it'll re-engage in another way. Like it's really hard for
Right.
your brain just to stay idle. Now, boredom is different than idleness because if you're bored, it means that there's nothing that's kind of like tickling your fancy and your brain may try to find something, right? Maybe it's like
Yeah.
a distraction like TV, or it's something where you go and you do something different. But honestly, some of the best aha moments happen when you're not actively looking at a problem.
Sure. So I really want to talk about this a little bit because I think it's really engaging the more creative part of your brain, the not so analytical portion. Because when you turn off that, like, I'm going to do this in this specific way, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I have to do this, this, and this. Like you said, your brain finds different like roundabout ways because your brain is always trying to solve problems, whether you're conscious of it or not. And I always found that like even creative people, when they're not trying to be creative is when they're the most creative. Analytical people usually will they'll solve a problem that they've been having for weeks when they're not thinking about the problem. And that's how your body and your brain work. And so if you don't give it that time to, a lot of people, when you're sleeping, this happens. Like if you are having a problem and you go to bed, that's why the term sleep on it is so, it's like really apt because it works. You get up and you're like, oh, I know how to do that now. Because while you were sleeping, your brain's figuring out how to solve this problem, right? So
Yes.
I think it's important to realize that sometimes the brick method of just hitting it over and over isn't going to work. Sometimes you just have to relax, let it go a little bit. I know some people take this to the extreme. I've done that too, where I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm very procrastinating. And I'm like, I'll do that later, right? Now that's an extreme on that, which you shouldn't always do. But it's all about moderating what you're doing and when you're doing it and how you're doing it.
It leaves time also for relationships and friendships.
Sure.
There's so many times when you maybe just need to drop in on somebody. And something that I've always done, and I think it was more, I don't know if it was necessarily because I knew how busy my life was going to get, but I actually planned certain times of down where I wasn't necessarily planned to do something.
Sure.
And so you'd find something to do at home, but then sometimes a friend had a need. And I've noticed that more and more people have been so planned. It's like, great, let's get together. Okay, how does next month look? And now sometimes that's just the nature of the beast. But oftentimes it's because we packed our schedule so tight, we feel like we're being better. And I say better, I say that very generally in an overall sense. Because you could say, well...
Yeah, if you're busy, you're doing something, right? And if you're doing something, you're moving the ball forward. And so I think people think if they pack their whole day with stuff, then they're always being productive, right? It's in reality not the way it happens.
No, and you start to make decisions that probably aren't optimal. It doesn't mean that you're making outright terrible decisions, but there's a reason why people have, if you look at some of the most successful people in the world, they have a routine that's set. They have those moments where they can read quietly, they can meditate, they have devotional or whatever like that, a prayer time. And it's just that time for them to kind of get their mind right for the day. Or it's the wind down ritual that they have at night. It's something that kind of gets them in a place where they don't have to engage this way they have to. It's like that rock in the river.
Right. Stream just goes around it, right? The flow goes around. So and if sometimes it's more beneficial to be not the rock in the river, but to be on top of the water and just kind of navigating the currents, right? So, I mean, there are times it's okay to be that rock, because sometimes you just got to stand and say, okay, I'm doing it this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times you don't. I mean, there's a optimal way to figure something out, or if you just solved a big problem, or if you just did a big thing, why wouldn't you want to take a little break, right? And just kind of zone out for a while. I know people that actually do that. They'll be like, okay, I've got this huge project at work. I'm working on. I'm not going to go to the next project right away. I'm going to take a day off.
There's, I think, for me, who I'm very achievement driven, just by my wiring and things, that if I say, okay, I got through this, and I'll go, okay, then I can go ahead and start the next thing. And that's usually my general tack. Although what happens sometimes is that I don't give myself enough margin to just have those moments of inspiration. And so what I started to do, even with meeting schedules now, is I put maybe a 15-minute gap in between, and people say, well, why isn't your schedule back to back to back to back to back? And some days, honestly, it is. But those moments allow me just to take a breath. I'm just going to chill for a minute, right? It kind of is the reset. Now, boredom and rest, sometimes we've kind of talked about both things on this particular episode.
Right.
Boredom and rest are not synonymous. Sometimes rest is very planned, or it's even... Rest would be something almost like what you would use in the fitness world, active recovery. I didn't hit the weights today, but I took a long walk, and that's restful. That's something that your body's kind of re-engaging. Doesn't mean that you're bored. When we talk about boredom, and we say in the old saying that boredom is the mother of invention, it's because you're trying to solve that problem, like Josh said. I had a question for you, Josh, on that, because I know you and I have talked about how we dream over the
Mm-hmm.
course of our friendship. In my adult life, I remember dreams less.
Yeah.
And the times they pop up are when I have really big life decisions to make, or there's something looming on the horizon. They don't make sense. It's not like I have these dreams where, and this epiphanous moment where it laid out the 5-year plan. It's really not my dreams. They're pretty random and they make less sense the more I'm awake the next morning. But for you, how have your dreams changed over time? Because if you're processing those things while you're sleeping, like what types of things are you trying to process through while you sleep these days?
I mean, honestly, like being an adult, I think as I've gotten older, when I do have stressors in my daily life, I do have more dreams about like stress related dreams, like I'm late for work or um, something like embarrassing happens to me, and I can't control it. I've also noticed as I get older, dreams are more about the feelings I have and less about like an event. So I'll wake up and I'll have like this feeling of like fear or
Hmm.
like dread or happiness or sadness or something. And more often than not, I would consider them negative feelings, maybe. Like people would consider them negative feelings. But I realize that that's like something I'm working through. Like anxiety is a big thing for me, and I have a lot of dreams I think that are driven by anxiety. And when I wake up, I'm very anxious. Like I'll get up and walk around the house. I'll go get some water, go to the bathroom. I'll check all the doors because I'm always like, oh, maybe I left something open, or whatever. But I just realized that that's just like my process. And as I've gotten older, and they're happening, honestly, they happen in cycles, throughout the year. I think it's certain times of the year when, like, for example, like we've got something big going on, or I've got something big going on at work. That's when it kind of happens more, and I remember it more. But it's like it is very different than when I was young. When I was young, it was about like just like super like usually things I didn't understand or very fearful things,
Hmm.
like a nightmare.
Do you find that if you've had the a block of boredom in a day, that you dream less or more?
Honestly, I do dream. I've noticed like when I had a bunch of days off and I was actually bored because I couldn't do anything, go anywhere, that I did dream more. And I
Hmm.
dreamt more about things that were like more every day, like me going to work. You know,
You dreamt about going to work?
I have dreamt about going. I have dreamt like I have the weirdest dreams sometimes. Like I have dreams that I wake up and I'm late for work, and then I just go to work. And I've had dreams where I do like my whole work day,
Oh,
and
man.
then I get up and then it's like, oh, it's only 6:30. You know, but I've had dreams too where that it's like makes no sense. There's like in my house now, but my house when I was a kid. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
things like that, like where it's like all this amalgamation of things happening, and it makes sense in the dream, but when you think back on it, it's like total nonsense.
I think with that, boredom will be scary to people because you don't have something to preoccupy yourself with. And
Sure.
so it really becomes a self reflection exercise. Those quiet rest moments that may be called boredom, that really may be called rest. Because there's like rejuvenating things that people do, even though that there is something kind of on the agenda to like go do or attend or something. But boredom is different because now you're faced with life. You're faced with those things you didn't want to look at or you didn't have time to process. And sometimes people don't want to deal with it. And so they keep themselves in perpetual motion.
Right.
Say, so I'm not bored. Now, some of it too, as we go through life, the brain nowadays is trying to say, hey, I want perpetual novelty. And it's harder and harder to hit that. We've lost the art of being bored because we've continually fed ourselves like the upper of novelty. And there's a lot of like low dopamine activities or something like that, where it's like those are actually needed things. Those are things like art. Those are things like maybe listening to music.
Yeah.
Harder to get into the flow, but very useful for people to go away and feel inspired.
Well, because it's replenishing that, right? And I think like we've talked about this before, but we're in this like moment now where people are trying to change like the very nature of being people, and like we haven't, that's all this stuff, the cell phone, this tech is all very new. I mean, it's only happened in the last, 25 or 30 years, right? So we can't just all of a sudden change like our biological reality that we need time sometimes. And we need the boredom. We need the rest. We need stuff not to make sense sometimes. And because that's how we are. That's how people are.
We sometimes, I think with that, I think about we worship at the altar of efficiency. We sacrifice ourselves for being effective people.
And look at, I'm going to just take one industry that does this, and that's the medical profession. Like when a doctor is training to be a doctor and their residents, they get praised for working, 48 hours straight and not taking any time off. But like I always thought to myself, isn't that the very antithesis of what you want a doctor to be?
Yeah.
Like don't you want that person that's doing the surgery on you or to be rested and calm instead of like doped up on caffeine and whatever else that they might be taking?
To keep them awake?
To keep them awake through the day? I mean, and that's the kind of things I think that we need to like really address as not only as a societal level, but a global level. And what is important? Like, is it important to work, 72 hours straight and then get 4 days off? Or is it important to maybe space that out a little bit and give yourself room to breathe and just be a human being,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, I'm not saying there's sometimes you just can't do that. Like if there was a tragic event, an emergency or whatever, you just might have to be going, right? But then take the time. You got to take the time. Otherwise, the time kind of takes you, like your body will just be like, and I know Brian and I both hit this, or at certain points where we're just like, I just can't do it anymore. Like I need a day or two. And so I think that a lot of people are on the verge of that and they might not even know it,
I think this episode has kind of become more about the necessity of breaking up your normal flow. That not necessarily a nice sounding title per se,
right?
But it's really like the triumvirate of boredom, rest, and rejuvenation.
Well, and that's what these episodes are supposed to be, right? They were not re-riffing on the topic we did before, but they were a continuation of the topic and how it's evolved.
Yeah.
So I think that that's fair. That's just probably how this topic has evolved, especially with our kind of post-pandemic society that we're in right now.
Let's put a comma here. Let's put a comma here, Josh.
Yeah, let's do it.
Until next time, this is Brian.
And this is Josh.
For Curiosity Continuum.